we already got through this first assignment. Very well done, everyone. So I'm Abby. This is me when I was 3 years old. And I grew up in a very rural part of Northern California where a lot of people were moving. Well, not a lot. It was a really small town, but pretty much everyone in the area that I was growing up had moved out there to try and live in a different way than they had experienced before. So you might recognize some of the like styles that you see in this picture. Some people might say they were hippies. This is my mother. She's feeding us popcorn covered in honey, which was what we got for Halloween instead of candy. And I don't know who that guy is. Okay, so that's me. I grew up out there. I moved to into Davis, which is a nearby city, to go to college. But I didn't go straight there. I went to community college and found out that I could actually, through community college, enroll in study abroad programs. And so I went to Prague, which is in the middle of Europe. And then I went to Budapest, which is even farther east in Europe. And I did that all through community colleges. So they were still study abroad programs, but I didn't have to have been admitted to a 4-year school in order to do them, which I felt like was kind of a hack. So I actually spent 1.5 years in Europe in community college, going to some of the best schools on the continent. And I was studying in Central Europe issues like globalization and global economics, and also some really complex politics like Central European post-communism and things like that. So it was just really interesting, much more interesting than what I was learning at my hometown community college. And it gave me a sense for what I could work on, which was actually how to address like big global problems like poverty and climate change, and that there were these like organizations all around the world trying to solve these big complex problems. But then working in there, I found that a lot of the organizations trying to solve problems were making new problems. And this is just my life story in 5 minutes. The new problems that they were causing sometimes were resulting from these organizations trying to implement one solution in many different places where the contexts were really different. Or they were problems coming from the organization had to, for example, deliver a certain number of vaccines, but the disease wasn't even a real issue. Or here's one weird example. There was some aid being delivered to Bosnia and Herzegovina, where there was some really poor communities that were having hunger problems. Then the aid organizations were dropping off pork products in a majority Muslim country. And so there was just I realized solving problems is not just always solving problems. Sometimes solving problems is creating new ones. And I realized that it was not going to work just to go to some problem solving organization and have that be the answer. So then I found out about an approach where there were people who had experienced a problem. And so this might be somebody who grew up in Bosnia and Herzegovina and had experienced hunger and started organizing their community to do, like a community agriculture project or something. But maybe this community agriculture project had a really innovative funding model. And they partnered with the government and maybe with artisans who were selling other products, or so, I'm just for example. So they had a creative approach in their own addressing the problem that they themselves understood, and that by supporting those people, we could maybe make more lasting and effective solutions, because those people knew a lot about the problems that they were trying to solve, and they cared really deeply about them. And because they had so much of an understanding of them, that they were probably going to be able to do it. And then there were some of those people who their ideas could work elsewhere. So even though they were like addressing a problem that they had experienced in their own community or context, the idea itself could be scaled. And scaled is like an idea that I started thinking of then, which was like, how could you make something that works really well, that's effective, that could also grow and impact other people in other environments? And that idea turned out to be like a whole area of work called social entrepreneurship. It's when people were using tools from business or from nonprofits or from government in a really creative way to address the problems that they had experienced. So they were acting kind of like entrepreneurs, but they weren't necessarily starting businesses. They were starting solutions. They were like solutions entrepreneurs. So I kind of like came into this world of work as my first job, and then it turned out that like schools were starting to teach this stuff. And so after working with a nonprofit for a while, I started working at PSU, who has a program called social entrepreneurship, where they're teaching students how to do this, how to spot problems, how to use tools to address them, how to like build coalitions and collaborations, and how to scale the ideas. So I was like, cool, let's do that. And here I am. Been working here for a while. I work with Jerry and Kavi on the Invention Bootcamp. I work in the School of Business on some academic programs that I'll tell you about later, but also on some community programs that are open to everyone. And I am always learning. It's such an interesting area of work, because I'm always learning about new approaches to addressing really pressing social problems. So it's actually very hopeful in a very tragic time to be working in social innovation. It's hopeful to be working in social innovation, I should say. So I hope that you all sort of start to see yourselves by the end of this as change makers, and find some hope and inspiration and energy, because we need it right now. It's a tough time. So the goals of this session will be to help you see yourself as a change maker. And to do that, I'll help you see how change makers spot problems, how you can give yourself permission once you see that problem to go address it, how to commit to that problem, find your people to help you work on it, identify roles, and go do it. So this is going to relate to a lot of what you heard. In fact, I helped select the speakers that you've heard from already. So I know those people, and I know the kinds of things that they talk about. And so I'll try and connect what I'm saying to what they've told you about. A lot of them are social entrepreneurs. Atiba Gaines, I would say, amazing social entrepreneur. She, even after she started all like company and Unreasonable Kids, the last time I talked to her, she's like, oh yeah, I started this breakfast roundtable for kids during COVID to talk to executives like over coffee in the morning so that they can like get comfortable in meetings. I was like, of course you did. So I'll try and like refer back to some of those speakers too. If I throw around this word, it's like, it is a meaningless word. It's not in the dictionary, but this is what I mean by it. A change maker is someone who steps up to solve a problem for the good of all. So one of the first steps in being a change maker is addressing a problem. And in business, when you go into business, people will say, what's your market? Like, is there a market for this? Is there a market for, electric toothbrushes that hold themselves up to your mouth? And you're like, I don't know, maybe you'd have to like go find out. In this area, we know there's a market because there's no lack of social problems. There's no lack of environmental problems.
Sarah, you want to go? You want me to go?
In social entrepreneurship, we see social problems as a market opportunity. But there's so many problems. There's so many. It's overwhelming how many problems there are. In this case, it's not like, is there a market? It's like, God, there's too many problems, actually. So when you're thinking about what could I do, there's a couple like questions that I ask myself. Does it matter? You know, does it matter that we don't actually have a toothbrush yet that like holds itself up to your mouth? I'd say no. You know, somebody might say that's a problem. I have to hold my toothbrush up to my mouth. I'd say maybe that's a problem, but it doesn't matter that much. Does it matter right now that international students enrolled at Portland State University have to leave the country if they're not enrolled in in-person classes? So we're starting to like get into yes, that matters. Does it matter that millions of people have lost their jobs in the last 3 months, don't have an income?
Yeah, on the last one, I got to hear.
I'd say that matters. But even in the problems that matter, I mean, there's like a lot.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So these are just some questions I used to narrow it down. Are some people benefiting?
Oh man, those felt like a good one.
And other people aren't? Is something unfair, inefficient, or not working?
Great to see you make that connection. So
there's a lot of problems out there. And this is a way that I start to narrow it down.
Alexis, you would know this, but
you can hear my husband in the background. We are sharing the basement as our workspace. But you won't hear him in a second, because actually what I'm going to do is we're going to break out into groups of 2 and just do a 3-minute exercise where I would challenge each of you in your group of 2 to consider what's a problem that that you've experienced. And so I'll just give, you know, an example. I just gave you a couple of examples of social problems that are so pressing right now. International students are having to figure out whether they have to leave the country right now. And millions of people have lost their jobs because of COVID. A social problem that I experienced, you saw that picture of me growing up in a rural community. One of the challenges we experienced there is that it's so isolated that we didn't have, we actually did, it was like a food desert. So there, even though it's like a beautiful, lush environment, the only stores that were nearby were like gas stations. So access to fresh, healthy food, we had to grow it. And when like our gardens didn't work out, or there was, you know, a drought, or like the deer ate the food, it was actually really hard to get food out there. So that's a social problem. You know, rural access to healthy food was a problem that I experienced. So this doesn't have to be like a big problem. This could just be a small problem, like you don't get Wi-Fi in your house and you have to be on classes all day. You know, there's plenty of social problems around us. So I'm going to ask facilitators to break you out into groups of 2, and you'll just have 3 minutes. So like basically a minute each. And as you're getting spun out into your rooms, think about what is one social or environmental problem that you've experienced in your own life. And facilitators, let me know if you have any questions about breaking people out.
I have a question. Did you want to include yourself and Jerry and Kavi in this, or just the students and mentors?
Can you include us too?
In this particular moment, yes. It's not like all the time, but just maybe like 10 a.m.
Thank you, Brayden.
So while Braden's working on that, just think about it. If you want to take a note, you can, or just think about your own life.
Hi, Abby, I'm ready.
Okay, let's go.
Start it.
So I'm curious to hear from a couple of people what came up for you. And I'm not going to ask you to share what your partner said, but if anybody's willing to share. B, yeah, thanks for raising your hand.
Hi.
What came up for you?
I said stuck at home with an abusive or neglected parent / guardian.
Wow.
It's apparently a lot more common than I thought.
How did you find out that it's more common than you thought?
I know that a lot of my friends when I was younger very much shared my situation, and I also know that a lot of my friends, even in high school, sometimes share this situation. And it's something where it's like when you're in school, when the world's not shut down, you have a place where you're not at home. You're not in that horrible environment. You're not somewhere that makes you like panicky and like, oh no, is someone even coming in the house? Like, I feel like I should hide. And it's something where it's like, oh, I'm going to go to the library, or I'm going to hang out with my friends. I want to have a sleepover so I don't have to be with this person, you know?
Yeah, wow. It sounds like it's something that you knew existed, but has probably come sharply into view in the last couple of months. And really interesting that you're learning about how pervasive of a problem it is. And really, a really urgent one. And I'm really sorry if it's something that you're experiencing. Thank you for being willing to share it with this group. I may refer back to the problem in general. I won't refer back to you in particular, but it's a really important example because it's not abstract. It's not as it is hard to take on problems like emission, like carbon emissions in the world, when that problem is not only abstract, but it's gigantic. And something like what you described is happening every moment in a lot of people's lives. And you actually have a lot of resources in hand to look at and examine the problem. So let's go into that. And what you've just described gets really, really closely to this next question. So you've identified a problem, but like with climate change or carbon emissions, here's the questions that I ask myself. Does it matter to me? Yes. Have I experienced it? Maybe, I mean, definitely, but like, I don't have asthma, I'm pretty okay. I've experienced it only subtly, to be like very honest. Do I have an inkling of what to do? For me, this is kind of a deal breaker. With carbon emissions, I'm like, I don't know what to do about that. I'm gonna like take a step back. Is there a problem I know about that I actually can maybe start to address? If you have a few of these and not, oh, sorry, I keep clicking around. If you have a few of these and not all of them, I feel like you could still get started. You might be able to fill in one. You might be able to like start where you know you have an inkling, but maybe you haven't experienced it, or vice versa. One of the questions that I think is really a lot of change makers ask themselves is also just this last one. Maybe you don't have the first three, but also if you don't do it, who's going to? And if the problem is urgent and it's happening now and it's happening to you, maybe it's not happening to you, but you know it's happening to someone else, that feels urgent. And maybe it is you that addresses it. So maybe these other ones get filled in later, but you start with you. Another step that's kind of scary is committing to the problem. That we're not asking you to do this in the Invention Bootcamp. This is actually like the opposite. It's kind of a place where you can really experiment, or you're committing in like a very micro environment. But the commitment is, it's a big hurdle for change makers to overcome because the work is really hard. And so there's a step to it that like without commitment, there's like a million things asking you to stop doing it. There's a million distractions in the world. There's a million things that are easier than solving a social or environmental problem. It might be even easier to get a hard job. Like, it might be easier to get into a good school. There's a lot of things that are like relatively hard, but still easier than solving social and environmental problems, even on a small scale. This stuff is not easy. So while it's like empowering and energizing, it's not easy. And so the commitment part like kind of has to come before you start working on it. Because if you start working on it, you're like, dang, this is hard, I'm out. I mean, that's one thing, but it's not going to solve the problem. So these are the ways that I think of committing. I think of like, what are my choices here? I could work on it or not. That's a choice. And so like in a lot of cases, I'm like, I'm not going to work on emissions right now. Not during COVID. Like I'm going to work on these things and emissions just isn't going to fit in there. Is it a moment to be silent or stand up? I did go to a protest with my toddler. You know, we stood like very far away from everyone. We were across the street. And it would have been easier not to. Like I had to put a weird little mask on his little baby face. But it's a moment for us to stand up. So I made that choice. And this last one is kind of a weird one. You might not see it in another presentation, but I have a friend who's an unusual person. He's been an executive in like pharmaceutical companies his whole life and well, his whole career. And when I was asking him about how he makes choices, he said he notices coincidence. I was like, how do you use coincidence to make choices? And then he said something that kind of resonated because I think it happens for all of us. That sometimes when it's really, really hard to make a choice, if you look around, sometimes things do feel like they're lining up. And they're very subtle. But like maybe, you know, you get a phone call from like your old friend and you ask them what they're up to and they're doing something similar. You're like, huh, coincidence. I was thinking about doing that too. Or, you know, or you take maybe like a science class, but your science teacher is really interested in like this social issue. And you're like, huh, maybe like that's like a resource I could use. And at the same time, maybe like you have you were going to do a Zoom call, but it was canceled. And so instead you can join like this like info session or something. And you just like, they're like small things, but I had to take it from this guy who's just working in like the highest echelons of this like most powerful industry. And how is he making his choices? He's sometimes noticing coincidence. I'm like, maybe that's not a good thing. That seems like a little like irresponsible, but he's like one of the most conscientious people I've ever met. And I just thought it was interesting that maybe there is something that we don't take advantage of, which are like the smaller things that line up when you're trying to make a hard decision. And so I just wanted to throw that in there because like, while these are all kind of like bullet points, you can like consider your choices, you can like go to do the thing, but then it's also just, what are you noticing? And another colleague said this to me. She was like, go where it's warm. It was kind of the same. It was like from like a very senior person. She said, go where it's warm when you're making a hard choice. And I was like, what does that mean? She's like, sometimes things just feel like they're really not like they're really sticking, you know, like you keep trying to call somebody and call somebody and call somebody and call somebody and they're just not responding, and you email them, try to set up a meeting and they don't show up. Like, but then there's somebody else over here who's saying like, I can help you. What she's saying is like, go with that person. Even if maybe like they don't have like the CV, they're like where it's warm. I thought that was really interesting. It's kind of the same thing as noticing coincidence. It's like, that's hard to quantify, but it is kind of there. In a lot of cases when I'm facing a choice, like, where is it warm? Where does it like feel like there's like a little bit of a pathway in? She says go there. This one works really well for me because I have a hard time working alone. So this principle is to bring friends. Find your people. These don't have to be like your friends from school. This could be, you know, that teacher that we just talked about who is a science teacher really interested in this social problem. You know, this could be somebody from the Invention Bootcamp that you worked on a team with. This could be an old friend that you knew growing up. But I find it really helpful to work even with one other person. It provides me with like this immense sense of accountability that I don't have necessarily when I'm working by myself. It also provides really important perspectives that aren't just my own and skills that aren't mine. So like I'm not very patient with data analysis. I know data analysis is going to like change our world, already has. I'm not very patient with it. I like see a data set and I'm like, okay, I kind of get it. Moving on. But so like I've noticed that when I work with people who are interested in data, they look at the data really differently than I do. They look at it through like many different lenses and they like visualize it and then they like sort it differently and then they find like themes and so data analysis is like very powerful, but something I don't have a lot of patience with. So it's a skill that I know I can like find in other people. So I'll like try and find data people to bring with me on projects because it can be so useful. You know, they might bring out a really important insight that I hadn't considered. And then the align around big goals point is like, we don't have to always agree on like whether we're using Zoom or Google Hangouts. You know, that's not the issue here. And that's not what's going to inspire us to work together. But if we're both driven to address neglect because it's both of us have experienced it or because both of us care about people who've experienced it, that's going to drive us together forward in a really significant way, in a committed way. So aligning around the big goals, and also when like if you're in collaboration, you'll notice this with your, you know, with your bootcamp teams too. If you think like you should do one part of something differently, that's not what we're talking about here. If in that moment you go back to the bigger goal, that will help your team move forward. Because ultimately you are trying to achieve the same thing. So when you're picking like teammates, also I'm like, find a data person, but find a data person who cares about this, and it's going to be really cool. And then I want to stop on this last slide because this is kind of a like a complicated statement. So I'd like for everyone to read this, and then I wonder, how are we doing on time? Do we have time to break out into another, do the twos again? That's a question for
Yes.
I think so, yeah. Okay, cool. So let's linger on this. And then let's read this for like about 1 minute and then break out into groups. And in your group, just try and like think about what this means. And then we'll come back together. Let's just do a 2-minute breakout. And then we'll come back together and talk about it. Because this is like after we talk about change making, addressing social problems, this is one idea that I think I really want to discuss with you guys. So Braden, will you get us ready? And then while we're reading this.
Yeah. Is it okay if they're the same breakout rooms?
Sure. Okay, and the question for this breakout room is, what does this mean? And so in this one, I feel like we can talk a bit about what you heard from your partner and what you thought of yourself. Is there anybody who's eager to describe what you talked about in your breakouts? I can't see everyone, so facilitators, if you can help me too. Maybe we should use the hand raising well, yeah, just move your arms around wildly so we can. Sydney.
Cool. I wasn't sure if I was trying to find the hand raising thing. Dustin and I talked about kind of how we understood the second half of this, but the first half was a little confusing at first. But I think we came around to sort of a general understanding of that it's sort of easier and more beneficial to help people that have a common problem with you, so that you can sort of you don't have to help one specific person and then move on because their problem is solved and done. It's more of a collaborative work to help each other and then help a larger community possibly that has the same problem.
I love that. So what you saw in this is that like through collaboration, you could solve problems more easily and in a bigger way.
Yeah.
Interesting. What did other people read in this? B, you have another?
Yeah, Tyler and I talked about basically how they're comparing liberation and helping. And what we talked about was the correct way to help. So there needs to be an understanding of what actually needs to be fixed and where the help is actually needed, and an understanding in order to actually help. So, just like with blind people, it's like, no, don't grab my arm. I'll ask for help if I need it. Like, you need to understand exactly how I need help. I'll ask you if I want to, versus someone who is also blind would know that or would understand it better. And so that's basically what we talked about.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good example too with people who are blind, because it is sort of, you do feel like, I'm not blind, I can help you. But that's also so metaphorical, like, really. So I love that. So you're saying that like understanding the problem with the people who are experiencing it will ultimately help toward finding a solution. Yeah. Anyone else have a reading of this that was different or agree with the readings that you heard?
Yeah, Mike here. Kyle and I, we talked about, we've labeled our breakout room as Real Talk number 13. And we got into the Black Lives Matter movement and the perspective that some people have towards it, versus like, oh, like we're here to help, versus we understand that the root of this problem is something that deeply affects us all, but also affects Black lives in a tremendous way. And there's no way that everyone can be free unless we solve these problems that are affecting Black communities and also like the entire United States.
Thank you for making it so real in your Real Talk group. And sorry for switching around the slides while you're talking. I was just trying to get closer into this statement. So it sounds like what you saw this, well, both of these parts. If you've come here to help me, as if you're not a part of the problem, you're wasting your time. And second, if your liberation is not bound with my liberation, if my liberation doesn't cause you also to have liberation, then we're not in this work together, which is so it's so exemplified in the way that we are engaging in Black Lives Matter and in racial justice movements, which is that like if I'm seeing myself as separate from the movement while I'm participating in it, I am wasting I'm not just my time, I'm wasting your time.
Right.
I think the bound liberation part of this is something that's such a different mindset than what we think of often with charity or like nonprofit work, or we'll just stick with charity, for example, because it's something we're all somewhat familiar with. But if we're like, I have this, I'm going to give it to you because you know, because you're suffering and I'm not suffering. You know, first of all, maybe the person maybe we're trying to like hand pork to a Muslim person who's not going to be interested or able to eat it. Second, if I don't see myself as connected to the problem, I might maybe have a role in working on that problem. And this is like such a deep and timeless insight. This is from an Indigenous Australian artist, but I think we'll find this in every area of social challenge and social movement. So I just like to come back to this when I'm starting to feel like, yeah, I got this. I'm working on this problem. I'm going to solve it. And then I'm like,
Yeah, that was wonderful meeting you all.
you know, like this is like a big, deep, broad question that I have to come back to kind of like every day.
He thinks he's bad, or he thinks he's being perceived as bad.
So thank you for grappling with it. It's kind of a complex one, and I welcome you to like keep noodling on it. And you know, if you have any insights about it or like areas that you see this as really applicable, I'm super interested to hear about it. And then we'll just go to one last idea. This looks kind of like complicated, but I'm just gonna use it as like a symbol that there's lots of different roles in creating social change. And we could go into each of these roles in a lot of depth, and I've included the like tags for the person who developed this particular social change roles map if you want to learn more about it. But the idea here is that you don't have to be the disruptor. You know, you don't have to be Elon Musk. In fact, if there were only Elon Musks, like we would be in like bad shape, because there are also people who are telling the story. Like, are you a good storyteller? Maybe your role in social change movement is to be the storyteller. You know, are you like on media a lot? Are you capturing things? Are you an artist? Are you able to like convey something that maybe some idea person isn't able to convey? Are you an experimenter? You're in this camp. Are you finding that like you love it when you fail because you get a bunch of information from that failure? You're like an inherent experimenter. You love messing up. You love every time you like find a clue that's like not going to work, because it gives you a ton of information about what is going to work. Like you don't want to talk about it. You don't want to like tweet about it. You don't want to storytell. You want to like experiment. You want to like press the button 10,000 times and see if it breaks. Are you a frontline responder? You know, are you like ready? Are you ready to be there? Are you like, you know, enough with all this data analysis, like put me somewhere that, you know, I'm interacting with people, put me somewhere where like, I'm like picking somebody, like holding somebody's hand, and like, are you a builder? I kind of see myself in this way. Like I can put programs together, you know, Jerry and Kavi and I have been doing that a lot with the Bootcamp. We're like, and I mean, Kavi especially, like, how do you get like buses, and how do you get meals, and like, how do you get a team? Like these things that are like building. There are disruptors. I mean, like the Elon Musk is like an important role in a social change movement. Somebody to be like, nah, like you think that you all have it, you don't. Like throw things up in the air. I'm sending a private spaceship out. And caregivers and healers. Like I have a close friend who's learning to work with traditional medicines from plants that particularly grow in Puerto Rico. There's like a long, incredible history of plant medicine in Puerto Rico that has been like largely lost. And she's working on like revitalizing the plant medicine movement in Puerto Rico with the elder community who has like parts of this knowledge. And so, you know, she would be like a healer in the social movement. So I would just like leave this with you so that you think, you know, if I'm talking all about change makers and you're like, okay, but I'm not one. Like, don't let yourself off so quickly, because in change making, there's so many different roles, and I want to challenge you to find yours. So I'm just gonna close there and stop screen sharing and open up for discussion, or if facilitators have a different idea for how to do discussion, or if we need to leave, let me know what we should do next.
I posted in the chat to post questions if you have them. We have one question that maybe you could answer really quick. What thoughts motivated you to move forward and to go to school and create your mindset?
I would say, like, I was just kind of curious. I would say, like, curiosity was my motivation, because I didn't know if I could find a study abroad program, but I'd heard about study abroad. I just like heard the word study abroad, and I was like, I don't know where that exists or who does that or how. So, you know, I looked in like the course catalog for my community college and saw a section for study abroad. And then I was like curious about Prague because it's a medieval city with castles. So to be honest, that was like the reason that I chose Prague. I was like, there's castles, real castles. No, like legit real castles with dungeons. That was why I went to Prague.
Okay.
And then I learned about like post-communist politics. But I would say like I just was curious about it, and I didn't know, and my parents didn't know, and we didn't have money, and I didn't know there were like advice. I really didn't know anything about school. So I guess I just was curious, and that allowed me to like find out that it was that these things were possible.
Gary or Kavi, do we have any more time or?
As far as I'm concerned, we could take more time. We are flexible. I'd rather that all the ideas that are swirling here get a little more time to breathe.
I personally really liked what you said about coincidence. I just thought that really resonated with me, not necessarily like karma or something like that, but coincidence, and just like taking those little hints from the universe of like, yeah, you should pursue this. And I thought that was really interesting.
Do you have any that you've noticed that you can think of, or yeah?
Yeah, recently I was searching for a job, and I had like mentioned something about searching for a job the night before. The next day someone like told me about a job that I could go get, and I was like, oh, that's kind of weird. So that was pretty cool. Yeah.
Cool. Somebody else was going to say something.
Well, I had a question. Braden also had a question just posted in the chat. I would like to prioritize questions from other people. So that question was, you seem to have found a really unique career. And did you have any ideas that this was the direction you wanted to go in when you were younger, when you were in high school?
I had no idea what job I would have. This was like in part because my parents didn't really have jobs, and I didn't really see people with jobs. So I didn't even think in terms of jobs really. But what I did know, and I can think of like the moment that I knew it, was that there was like really big problems all around us, and like I wouldn't I just really felt like I needed to work on them. And it was like I was actually, before that, I was doing a lot of theater, and I loved doing theater, but in that moment, now I see it kind of differently. Like there's like art and performance has such an important role in social change, but at that point I was like, sorry, theater, I gotta go work on international relations.
Yeah. Well, thank you for answering that. I have a question I'd like to ask if you'd be willing. I'm very curious your thoughts on like social entrepreneurship poses, entrepreneurship as a force for good, and poses like entrepreneurship within a capitalist framework as being potentially still workable as a way to make life better for people, as opposed to like Marxist philosophy, which really says, no, like we really need to burn the whole idea of capitalism to the ground before we can start making those changes. Social entrepreneurship says, wait a second, what if that's not entirely true? I'm wondering if you yourself, in your experience, perceive social entrepreneurship as just like making the best of the situation we have, or as a legitimately like new and engaging possibility of a way that we can work towards positive change?
That's a really good question, Whitman. And I wonder, like, we can like get into more of those philosophies if people are interested in learning more, but I'll totally respond to that. The way that I use entrepreneurship is that it's like borrowing tools from business, essentially co-opting them to create social change. And I don't think that like scaling an organization has to remain in like the business sector. I think that creating a business model or a revenue strategy to fund your radical Marxist uprising like has to stay in business. I think that we can like essentially like pull tools out of traditional capitalist business and plop them in like these really creative new approaches, and instead of like building a wall and ignoring the toolkit because it was built by capitalists, we can like have vastly more resources at hand, and not money, but like models and skills and approaches than we would if we said like, we're not engineers, so we're not going to use, you know, tools from engineering, and we're not business, and we're not artists, and we're not like constructor, you know, we're not builders, and we're not like doctors. So we like box ourselves into like some little like, I'm a social entrepreneur, I have like no skills. I think instead of doing that, we can like actually tear down these walls and say like tools from business are really important. And what entrepreneurs do in business is actually create like new ways of doing things. And so that's what I mean by entrepreneurship, is like we're creating a new way of doing something. And we're doing it with tools like straight up business models, like know who you're trying to reach, know who your partners are. This is like a business model. We would like leave this in business if we didn't open this door. Super useful. Know how you're going to bring in funds and the difference between your funders and your marketing partners. Like this is stuff that a social movement would need to use. And I'm just advocating that we pull apart some of these traditional like sector walls, because we need all the tools we can get.
Thank you. That was a really, really great answer. Thank you very much.
Kavi has a question.
Yeah,
I can say, how can we apply this awareness about social problems and needs when we think about inventing something? Well, I can tell from your question that you already are. So inventing is like really closely it's like closely integrated alongside change making. You know, what we're talking about is like inventing an approach, and in your case you're inventing a device. So I don't even think you have to like worry about the difference that much. Just think about like when you're thinking about your invention, you could like ask all those same questions. You know, does this invention address a problem that matters to me? Does it address a problem that matters at all? And maybe that's not the goal with the Invention Bootcamp, like you're learning to use Arduino, that's a really important goal. But if you do want to like take the next step and use your invention to address a social or environmental problem, you can ask all of these same questions.
Thank you, Abby.
Okay.
Does anyone else have any last minute questions?
I did want to say one thing. This is like mostly for mentors, but for campers who are thinking about coming to PSU, I run a certificate in social innovation, and it's a 4-class certificate open to grads and undergrads. They're all elective credits, and I know it's hard for engineering students to like work in electives, but the 4 classes take you through like the development of a social impact idea.
Awesome.
That
Thank
sounds
you.
awesome.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
And I'm gonna put my email here, or I don't know if you guys are sharing like circulating email addresses, but you can write to me to ask about the certificate.
Wonderful. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Abby. I think we have at least one camper that's coming to PSU in the fall. Kyle?
This is
You'll actually hear from me in like 4 years.
I'm so excited. And you can stay in touch in the meantime. If they're, you know, if you're like really interested in doing it too, you can do it as a high schooler. I don't know how we can like, we might be able to arrange credit. You can take it as a high schooler, but I'm not sure how you would fit it in. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Well, it's really, really good to meet you guys. Thank you so much for including me. Thanks for listening to these wild ideas.
Thank
Now,
you so much for making the time.
Hope we stay
I
in
want,
touch.
and I want to make sure everyone hears that Abby is a part of this team, and the existence of Bootcamp is a team effort. So, you know, I have a small subset of nerd skills, and we function as a team because we complement each other. So it's really important that you see what we're doing now is the outcome of the practices that Abby is talking about.
That's true. It's kind of meta. Whoa. Okay. Thanks, you guys.
Yeah,
Really good
and
to meet you.
Abby, I also wanted to let the campers know that we have all the great speakers have been thanks to you connecting us with all these great folks who have so much to add to us, for us, and adding value and telling us about all the incredible things they're doing. Thanks for connecting us with all our wonderful speakers this year.
Not all of them, but it's been a pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
I give you